The heat of the afternoon still clung to the air when they brought her out. The sun had dropped low enough to cast everything in a red-gold haze, the kind that turned dust to fire and shadows to black bars. She stood beneath the creaking frame of the auction post, hands bound before her with coarse rope, dress faded and travel-worn. Her hair had loosened from its pins, dark strands sticking to her temple, but her chin was lifted as if she dared the whole town to look her way. Men leaned against fence rails, hats pushed back, grins curling sharp as knives. Their laughter broke across the yard like a whip crack, too loud, too sure of itself. A boy threw a stone that skittered near her feet. She did not flinch. The auctioneer's voice rang above them all, calling out numbers with the easy rhythm of a man who had sold cattle his whole life. He called her a bride, as though that word might make her more desirable, as though the ropes didn't tell a truer story. Somewhere behind the laughter, a wagon wheel creaked. Someone spat. Life went on as if this moment were ordinary. But she was not ordinary. The air around her seemed to resist what was happening, holding its breath. The first bid came from a man with a red beard and a belly that pressed against his vest buttons. He named a number, too low to be serious, just enough to start the crowd's roar again. He made a joke about her spirit needing to be broken before she'd be any good. The men laughed harder. She stood taller, refusing to give him the satisfaction of lowering her gaze. Another bid followed, a little higher, shouted from the back of the crowd. The air turned rougher with each number until the whole yard seemed like a game with her at the center. The rope pulled at her wrists where she had tried to twist free before they brought her out, leaving her skin raw. She kept her hands still now, not out of surrender, but because she would not waste her last strength giving them a show. It was then she noticed him. He was not among the loud ones. He stood off to the side, near the shadow of the barn, hat brim pulled low. His clothes were plain. Dust settled deep into the creases, as if he had ridden far to be here. He did not lean on anything. He did not laugh. His hands were loose at his sides, one thumb hooked in his belt like a man who was comfortable with silence. The auctioneer called for another bid. The red-bearded man shouted something crude that made the crowd howl. Still the quiet man did not move. She found herself looking at him, though she could not see his face clearly. It was the stillness that drew her, the way it cut through all that noise like cool water. When the bidding stalled, the auctioneer began to prod the crowd with jokes. She could feel the moment slipping, feel the laughter starting again. That was when the quiet man spoke. His voice carried across the yard, steady as a church bell. "My son needs her." The words fell like a stone into a pond, stilling everything around them. No one laughed this time. Even the auctioneer hesitated before calling out the next price. The man did not raise his voice, did not offer more than those 5 words. But something in the way he said them left no room for mockery. Another number was shouted, higher this time, but it sounded half-hearted. The crowd had lost its taste for the game. The quiet man named his bid without looking up, and that was the last one. A moment later the rope was cut. She rubbed her wrists where the fibers had bitten deep, feeling the skin burn. The man stepped forward, not close enough to touch, just near enough that she could see his face at last. Weathered and strong-boned, lined by sun and work, but his eyes were clear and unhurried. He nodded once toward the edge of the yard, an invitation rather than an order. She thought of running. The road stretched beyond the yard, open and empty. But she did not move. Perhaps it was the way the crowd had fallen silent, or perhaps it was the boyish honesty in the man's gaze. Whatever it was, her feet turned toward him, and she followed. They walked past the wagons, past the horses tied along the fence. A few voices called after them, but the man did not look back. He lifted her onto the sorrel mare that waited by the gate and swung into the saddle of his own horse. The two animals moved together as if they had done so for years. The town fell away behind them. The last light of day stretched long shadows across the road, painting the plains in bronze and violet. She sat stiff in the saddle at first, clutching the mane, not daring to speak. The man rode ahead just far enough to clear the dust, his back straight but easy, as though he had no fear she would turn and run. When the land dipped into a shallow creek bed, he slowed so she could drink. She knelt by the water, letting it cool her throat, her face. When she turned back, he had not dismounted but waited with the same patient quiet, as though time itself moved slower for him. They reached his land as the first stars appeared. A small house stood near a stand of cottonwoods, smoke rising from the chimney. A boy no more than 8 waited on the porch, bare feet swinging above the steps. He sprang up when he saw them, then hung back as she dismounted, half curious, half shy. "This is her," the man said simply. The boy's eyes widened, then softened. He stepped forward and held out a small wooden carving, a horse, rough-hewn but careful. She took it, surprised by the weight of it in her palm. For the first time all day, something inside her eased. Inside the house, the fire burned low but warm. The man set bread and beans on the table, gesturing for her to sit. She ate slowly, aware of how her hands trembled with each bite. No one spoke much. The boy leaned against the doorframe, watching her with quiet wonder. When the plates were cleared, the man brought out a second quilt and laid it on the bed in the spare room. He nodded once, as if to say that was all, then stepped out, leaving her with the faint smell of wood smoke and horses. She lay awake a long while, staring at the rafters. The wind moved through the cottonwoods outside, soft and constant, like a lullaby too far away to catch. Her wrists still ached, but the ropes were gone, and for the first time in many months she felt the strange weight of safety pressing down on her. It was not trust, not yet, but it was enough to let her close her eyes. Morning came soft and pale, a quiet gray that painted the house in stillness. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of a rooster somewhere beyond the cottonwoods. The spare room was plain, just a bed, a narrow window, and the quilt he had left folded at her feet. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dew and wood smoke. For a moment she lay still, letting the quiet sink into her bones. It was a different kind of silence than the auction yard, one that held no mockery in it. She found him outside, already working. The rancher was stacking fence rails with a rhythm that looked practiced, slow but sure, as if there were no need to hurry. The boy was feeding chickens nearby, his hair still mussed from sleep. He looked up at her and grinned, shy but proud, as though he'd been waiting for her to step out and join the day. She asked what work needed doing, her voice almost catching from disuse. The man just nodded toward the wash bucket. And so the day began. The rhythm of the ranch became her teacher. She learned how to hang wet clothes so the wind could catch them, how to scatter feed without starting a squabble among the hens, how to patch a tear in a boy's trousers with thread so fine it was almost invisible. Each task grounded her, pulling her back into her own skin. At night, after supper, she would sit by the fire while the boy showed her the wooden animals he carved, a horse, a rabbit, a bird, each one smaller and more careful than the last. The rancher spoke little, but when he did, it was to say what mattered. He mended her worn shoes without being asked. He left kindling stacked by the porch when the wind turned colder. He did not touch her, did not press her, but she felt the steadiness of him everywhere, in the fence lines kept straight, in the gate latch that never stuck, in the way his son's laughter came more easily now. It was weeks before she felt the first thread of something like safety. She caught herself humming once while washing dishes and froze, startled by the sound of her own voice. The boy grinned at her, and for a moment she laughed too, a sound so rusty it almost hurt her throat. But safety is a fragile thing. He came one evening near sunset, the man from the auction yard, the one with the red beard and the loud laugh. She saw him first from the window, dust rising behind his horse. Something cold gripped her stomach. The rancher stepped out onto the porch, quiet as always. "She's mine," the red-bearded man said, dismounting with a heavy thud. His voice carried the same jeering tone as that day, but now it sounded uglier against the hush of the open land. The rancher did not raise his voice. He just stood between the man and the door. "You paid," the man sneered, "but so did I. I was outbid, that's all. I've come to finish what should have been mine." The boy appeared behind the rancher, wide-eyed. She gripped the edge of the table inside, heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. "You'd best leave," the rancher said, calm as a still pond. The man laughed a rough bark. "Or what? You'll fight me for her." For a long moment no one moved. The air felt tight as a drawn bow. Then the rancher stepped down from the porch and closed the space between them, not quick, but certain. His shadow stretched long across the dirt. "She's not cattle," he said low and steady. "She's under my roof. You'll ride off now and you won't come back." Something in his voice, not loud, not angry, just carved from iron, made the red-bearded man falter. He spat in the dirt, glared once at the house, then swung into the saddle. "This ain't over," he growled, but his horse turned under him and carried him away until the dust swallowed him whole. The yard fell quiet again. The boy exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath. The rancher turned back to the house. His face was still, but his shoulders carried the weight of what might have been. That night she could not eat. The memory of the man's laugh clung to her like smoke. She stepped out onto the porch after dark, letting the night wind cool her skin. The stars were clear and sharp, scattered like spilled salt across the sky. She heard the door open behind her, soft on its hinges, and the rancher came to sit on the top step. Neither spoke at first. The sound of the cottonwoods filled the space between them. "I thought I'd never be safe again," she said at last, her voice low, as if afraid to wake the dark. "Not since the day they took me from the farm. Even tonight," she broke off, wrapping her arms around herself. The rancher nodded once. "You are safe here." The words were simple, but something in them rang true enough to settle deep in her chest. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Why did you buy me?" He was quiet a long while. Then he said, "Because my son needed someone strong to look up to. Someone who'd show him that the world can be cruel, but a person can stand tall anyway." She turned toward him, surprised. The firelight from the window caught his face, showing the lines carved by years of weather, the tired kindness in his eyes. He wasn't looking at her like she was a debt he had paid or a duty he was owed. He was looking at her like she was a choice. Her hands trembled as she reached out, letting her fingers brush against his. He didn't move, didn't press her closer, just let her find the courage to stay there. The next morning, when they saddled the horses for the ride into town, she did not wait for him to offer his hand. She mounted on her own, sitting straight-backed despite the whispering wind. The boy rode ahead, laughing, his hat nearly too big for his head. The town grew closer with each hoofbeat, roofs glinting under the rising sun. People looked up as they rode past, the rancher, his son, and the woman they had seen roped like a criminal weeks ago. There was no laughter this time. She felt the stares but did not lower her gaze. The rancher rode beside her, steady as ever, his shadow stretching beside hers. When the sun climbed higher, he removed his hat and held it out to shield her face from the light. She took it, slipping it onto her head, and for the first time since she had been brought to this place, she smiled. The smile was small, quiet as dawn, but it carried the weight of something won back, not given, not bought, but reclaimed. And though the road ahead was long and dust-strewn, she felt the strange, humbling certainty that she was no longer walking it alone. If this tale touched your heart, ride along with us for more Wild West stories. Don't forget to subscribe.